Hello and welcome to Super Saturdays, a comic book media podcast where each episode we will be focusing on your favorite comic books, TV shows, and movies to figure out if these projects will stand the test of hot time. I'm Damon A, and on today's episode, I'm joined by.
JC Elliott.
All right, on with the show. So you love comic books, so I want to hear your thoughts on maybe a news item that came up within this week.
Let's see.
And well, actually, you know what? Do the work for me, because in all honesty, I forgot to grab the notes for this week. So, is there anything within the comic book news realm that really grabbed your attention?
I think mainly, of course, Blue Beetle coming out, but I haven't seen that yet. It's coming out Saturday. I'm going to go see it on Saturday. But mainly, I watched like an interesting video by, I don't know if you ever watched Comic Drake, the YouTuber. He uploaded of course, yeah, he uploaded a video about ways, because I'm also a huge manga reader as well, about ways like the comic book industry can take from like the manga industry and all that stuff. And you mentioned something that I really liked is the idea of just like maybe like compiling like a lot of the books into like one big magazine. Like if you're unfamiliar, if you or anybody else watching is unfamiliar with Weekly Shonen Jump, is that like, basically you get like, it's like a magazine, weekly magazine, and you get like, new chapters of the current series that, like, for example, let's take One Piece. Like you get like a whole book, and it'll have like the new chapters, like for example, like the newest chapter of One Piece, new chapter of My Hero Academia, the newest chapter of Jujutsu Kaisen, and if that way you have it all in like one place. And I think that's something that like the comic book industry can definitely like learn from and whatnot. So that's something that I'm always interested in, because like I'm a fan of both manga and comics pretty much equally. I don't have a preference over one or the other, but I do think like it's like it's telling that a lot more people think that it's like harder to get into comics than manga and whatnot, when I feel there's ways we should like the industry should make it easier.
I agree with that. Honestly, I feel like one of the ways that they could have made it easier is let comics be more accessible, like how it used to be. Because I remember they used to sell them at grocery stores.
Yeah.
I know that like DC tried kind of revitalizing that with the whole Walmart deal that they had, where they would release a magazine that had some reprints, but then it had like one new comic in there. I
Yeah.
think that would be a good way to like really engage readers and get people to start reading comics. I heard a couple of different people who are big into the MCU stuff flat out admit, I don't read the comics. I just watch the movies, which there's nothing really wrong for that. But I think comics can be really daunting for some people and hard for them to really get into. And making it easier for them to like find means of doing it, it just makes it better. It also helps the artists and the writers who are working on them as well too. I think that's why I like that James Gunn is doing a lot to point people towards the books that the movies he's working on are being inspired, and just him talking about them in general.
Yeah, I was just about to bring up James Gunn. I think what he's doing when it comes to like promoting these comics, because it didn't just start with like James Gunn as well, because like the Batman last year, it actually promoted like Matt Reeves promoted like comic books that his like that specifically the Batman was inspired by. I forgot which comics he promoted, but like
I think it was Batman Ego, and it was Year One Ego, and I want to say maybe Dark Victory, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, of course.
Oh, and Long Halloween too, a little bit too.
Yeah, the Long Halloween, that's definitely something I remember. So yeah.
Honestly, I completely forgot that like Matt Reeves did sit down and let people know. I remember people were hella like excited and even surprised that he was pulling from Ego, because that's like a book that like not many people talk about. And I thought that was a good way to like really tell them like, yo, I did my homework and everything.
Yeah, that's a green flag when they take something very obscure and just like use it as like a source material.
Exactly. So on today's episode, we are doing the Spider-Man and Human Torch miniseries. So before we really dive into this episode here, I just want to ask you, JC, what was your first introduction to the Human Torch?
My first introduction to Human Torch was the 2005 Fantastic Four movie. I still hold a lot of love for that movie, even though it's not the definitive, nowhere close to the definitive Fantastic Four movies. Fantastic Four movie, but like maybe it's the fact that like a lot of the other Fantastic Four movies are just like meh, that like people that I like it so much. Maybe it's just nostalgia, but I feel a lot of that stuff actually holds up. And my favorite member of the Fantastic Four originally, like when I was like when I saw the film when I was 5, was the Human Torch because like
Hmm.
I felt like just him being like this like kind of like laid back jokester type of character. I just thought he was like really cool. So yeah, that was probably my first introduction to the Human Torch, and has always been like I say right now my favorites probably like interchangeable between maybe him and the Thing when it comes to members of the Fantastic Four, but like Human Torch was like the first member of the Fantastic Four that I really liked.
Honestly, I'm in the same boat as you. Not him being the favorite, but I would say that my first introduction would have to be the 2005 movies. Actually, no, take that back. I think it'd be the 90s animated series because I
Okay.
remember seeing them from there. And that was my first introduction to the Fantastic Four. And then the movie came out and I was like hella excited.
Yeah.
And the Human Torch has always been a character that I really fucked with, like
Yeah.
primarily because of like his powers and how he was cool and how he was just funny.
Yeah.
And in this book, he was kind of a dick, but like they really bounced him and Spider-Man off of each other. And ever since I was like younger and found out that the Human Torch and Spidey are like best friends, it just made it even better. And I am so glad that you liked those early 2000 Fantastic Four movies. I like how those movies are getting a kind of resurgence on Twitter because I see a lot of people talking about them and talking about how like they took those movies for granted and like it's not the best movie, but it did a really good job of like telling you who the team is and everything. I
Yeah.
think the first movie, and y'all might hate me for this, Soups. I personally feel like the first movie feels like a movie that could have been in the MCU.
Yeah, I like to describe the Fantastic Four movies because I felt it did a lot right. It feels like a pilot to like a Fantastic Four TV show.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I feel
Hmm.
like because what these movies are mainly missing are the is like the exploration of the Fantastic Four,
Like the
and
grand story, the grand
exactly.
scale.
Like it
Hmm.
feels like, we're just on like episode 1 and they don't go past episode 1. You get the basis, you get the team. You get Doom, who is very much the worst part of it because he's literally just a reskin Norman Osborn. And like and I think really like, I think like it gets a lot right. I think like the casting, with the exception of Ben Grimm, only because the actor isn't Jewish, like Ben is.
Mm.
And I think that's like I think like but even then I felt about like in like out and even outside of that, I feel like the casting is like I still think Johan Gruffudd as Reed Richards is literally perfect casting, just like
Perfect.
yeah, right casting, just raw movie needed better writing. I would have loved to like I don't know, I'd love to see him like return as like a cameo one day, but overall that's like that's just always been like my I've always liked those movies even though I know that they're flawed.
Hmm.
Yeah.
I personally feel like instead of us getting oh god, drawing a blank, John Krasinski as Mr.
Yeah,
Fantastic and
I
Multiverse of
didn't really.
Madness, they should have just did Ian Grufford instead. I feel like it would have had the same type of like appeal. It would have been awesome. I would have liked to have seen it. And like I think the Fantastic Four movie was excellently casted. I
Yeah,
think the guy Michael Chiklis who did play the Thing, he did a really good job, especially with the Thing voice. And apparently, back when he was a kid, the Thing was his favorite character, and that was
yeah.
like a dream come true for him.
Also, like the prosthetics is just like really cool. It's just like
Yeah.
yeah, I really hope for the MCU Fantastic Four that we get like a mix of like because they like to CGI everything,
Hmm.
unfortunately. But I would love if we just get like a mix of like like kind of like that prosthetic, but also mix it in with CGI. That's like a good happy medium.
It's possible. They did that with Man Thing on that special presentation. Man Thing was like they made like a whole practical suit and then they CGI'd over it. It was like a mixture of the two. I think it's possible.
Well, that's cool.
I would say like, I still want the thing to be big, almost as big as the Hulk, but I feel like there's like a little like happy medium between the two, I'd suppose. Well, without further ado, are you ready to dive in, JC?
Yep, I am.
All right, let's dive in. This book collects 5 old school adventures featuring your favorite web-headed hero and his pal, the walking matchstick. Follow them through the years from high school to present day, from the negative zone to the coffee bean, from Dory Evans to Mary Jane Watson Parker. Yes, Watson Parker.
Watson Parker.
It's all here. So, okay, this book, Soups, for the people at home, this book is a book that I've been wanting to do for a long time on this show, and it's one of my favorites. This is a 5-issue miniseries featuring Spider-Man and the Human Torch, written by Dan Slott and drawn by Ty Templeton. I'm looking over to my right shoulder because the book is right next to me.
Of
I'm gonna
course.
lift it up in camera. This is what it looks like, guys. Yeah. And like initially, I would say this book is just really, really good. This feels like a whole love letter to the two characters, especially to like the eras that it like shows. Each issue is like a different era within like the Spider-Man Fantastic Four landscape. It starts from the 60s and then goes through the 70s, 80s, and then to like present day, which is like 2005. But I liked it a lot. So what was your like initial thoughts when you like read this? Have you read this before, JC?
I read like the first issue of the book, but I didn't read the next, like, the next couple issues before that. So when I came on, so before I came on this podcast, I made sure to read the first issue just so I can, like, refresh my memory and then read the rest. And I very much enjoyed it. I gotta say, like, just get out this way. The art is really good. It really feels like I have like this love for like art where it's just like it looks new, like this comic arc looks new, but it feels like very like like adapted from like the classics, like in the 60s and 70s.
Yeah.
Yeah, it feels like very Silver Age, while also being kind of like polished up to be new. So I think the art is fantastic. When it comes to the story, also it's also great, and I think like I like the formatting of it, where it's just like one issue is just like different eras and whatnot, and it really feels like it really feels good to like be a fan of both these characters, and you see like be a fan of both these characters, and you see like and like what's like happening in the background if you're like a really big fan, like oh, I believe issue 4, this is when Peter has the black suit, like Peter reference, like getting ahead of myself, Peter references the Clone Saga and like issue
That
5.
was funny as hell when he referenced that. Like, I loved that in the last
Yeah,
issue. Basically, Soups, what happens is that by the end of this issue, you basically find out, well, the Human Torch finds out that Peter Parker and Spider-Man are one and the same.
yeah,
And so they meet up at their usual spot and they're just reminiscing over everything that's transpired throughout their entire friendship. And then Johnny is like, well, what about that one time where I helped you with so and so? And then Spider-Man's like, that's my clone. And he's like, or the other time clone, or this one time clone. I'd rather just not talk about it. I love those meta jokes that were like throughout this entire thing. Like it was just a fun ride.
yeah. And I think really something that I would have like, this is necessarily a flaw of the book, but something I would have liked to, I probably would prefer to see. I
Mhm.
kind of wish that the book was from the Human Torch's perspective, honestly, because of course, like maybe it's like me being like obviously more of like a Spider-Man fan, knowing more about him. Maybe it's just like the fact that he's more popular. Like obviously the fact that he's more popular is why is from like his perspective a lot of the time. But like but I think really like it would have been interesting seeing like especially comparing that, seeing that the book leads up to Peter Parker, like Johnny Storm finding out that Peter Parker is Spider-Man, which is a very hilarious reveal, by the way.
Mhm.
And so I think it would have been good to see that, like, see the whole story from his perspective. Like, obviously we know, like, but but like, Johnny doesn't know, and I think that honestly would have been really cool to see, but especially considering like the dichotomy between the two, because like Johnny Storm is like a character with no secret identity. He's just a Human Torch. He's just a celebrity. That's all he. That's who he is. Like that's who everybody knows him as. Versus Peter Parker, where it's Peter Parker and it's Spider Man. Like so, only a very little amount of people know who he is. And I think like that would have been served as a great dichotomy. But even then, overall, it's just like was I like how it started. Like let's start with issue 1 of just like Johnny Storm wanting to just like wanting to like get like his own photographer and whatnot, and that photographer being Peter and whatnot, and how the two kind of clash because like of like the differences between them, where it's just like a lot of people when they think about Johnny Storm and Peter Parker, they think of them as like they think of their jokester, their quipping like personality, and but then like while that's like a core trait that they share, also the fact that they're both very young superheroes, it's like
Mhm.
they're like a lot of them is more different, obviously, like a lot of like they're more different, they're very different, you know Peter having all this responsibility, being much more mature and responsible versus Johnny not being those things. And it serves for a good dynamic, especially to start with. Seeing them like butt heads is very like I feel it's very on brand.
I'm glad that you mentioned Peter being Johnny's photographer and everything. I don't know about you, but did you watch that one Fantastic Four animated series where it looked anime-esque or
World
whatever?
Greatest Heroes. I was just about to bring that
Yeah.
up earlier. Yeah, I actually rewatched quite a few episodes last year when I was going through like a Fantastic Four hyperfixation.
Yeah. And reading this, it made me think about that one episode where Johnny hired a photographer. And I know that behind the scenes, that photographer was supposed to be Peter Parker, but they couldn't say Peter Parker because of rights or whatever.
Yeah,
Like it just reminded me of that. And like this book was just a whole ride. Like it was just joke after joke after joke, especially the paste pot Pete like
Mhm.
whole page or whatever, which I think is like a pretty famous panel because every now and then I see that on like Twitter or like other places where people just want to have a laugh or whatever. Just I don't know. What would you say were a couple of your favorite moments in this book?
I say probably specifically issue one. Just trying to think about it. It's just like probably like near the end where like Johnny Storm, where like Johnny like gets all the credits, and like of course Spider-Man is of course on his typical Spider-Man Parker luck, where it's just like oh, he's the menace, but Johnny Storm's a hero and whatnot. And I think like that's also very like I think that's like the reason why I really like that moment is because of how again that dichotomy between Peter and Johnny, Peter having a secret identity and Johnny not having like a secret identity and just being like and just being like kind of like this celebrity and whatnot. And it comes like I feel I like this like I like it more when it comes to like full circle to the very end of the book where we see where like we see how Johnny really feels about Peter Parker's life. And I think like that part is just specifically just like probably like my favorite part to see and whatnot. But like also just like Peter slash Spider-Man just like butting head with Johnny, like seeing like those moments. Of course, like the pedo pots, like the little like joke near the end.
Mm.
That's like also very hilarious and whatnot. So I think this was like a very like good start, probably.
Okay, okay. Is issue one your favorite out of the whole thing, or would you say like it's like not your favorite?
It's not my favorite. I think my favorite is probably it's probably like issue 3 or 5, because like kind of like the wholesome ending, but also 3 because like also 5 because it features Mary Jane, of course. That's like, my that's one of my favorite characters of all time. In issue
Listen, we're in
3,
the same boat here. Like, she
exactly.
stole the show. Honestly, this whole book, like, she stole the damn show, if I'm being quite honest.
Exactly.
Like, as she always does, Mary Jane really did steal the show in that last issue.
Yeah, like my favorite like line from her was when somebody asked, "Wasn't there a man saying this to you?" And she said, if you notice there was someone standing next to me, I'm slacking. I thought that was perfect. But that specifically, we'll get to like reason why I like that issue when we get to it. But also issue 3, I'm just trying to make sure I'm trying to remember if I have like the right numbers because that talks about like Gwen's death. Yeah,
Yeah.
issue 3, because I remember issue 2 was like that actually like kind of had like the coffee bean and with like Gwen and MJ and Harry and whatnot. So
Yeah. Honestly, the whole thing, when I was reading it, I was thinking about how this book really could have been animated. Like, the pacing in
yeah,
this was just fantastic. It, it just, I don't know.
yeah,
The pacing was just fantastic. Like, the pacing felt like it was cinematic, but also felt like it could have been lended itself to a animated series. In all honesty, I still feel like if Disney wants to do something with Marvel, I'd say have a short. Just do shorts or whatever. Do a Spider-Man and Human Torch short. Let's do it.
yeah.
Let's do it.
I would love if like Disney and Marvel took some more like cues from like while like definitely the DC animated films are can be hit and miss. I think like it's still ultimately good in conception. So I would love to see like more Marvel like animated shows like this and whatnot.
Exactly. All right. So with this first issue, personally, the only like takeaways I have with this first issue is that Johnny really did come off as a dick in this first
Yeah,
issue, especially when he had Peter as his photographer. And did we even find out if Peter even got paid for it or not? I don't know.
not sure. I don't remember.
I don't remember either. Ultimately, some stuff happens. Johnny then wants to go after Doctor Doom, ends up getting frozen in the process,
Yeah,
and it actually gave us the best joke I've read in a minute within a comic, where basically Spider-Man saves him, and he starts picking away at the ice, and then accidentally picks off his hair.
I love that. I love that, especially perfect joke for Johnny, considering who he is and whatnot.
Mhm.
And then and then Ben is just roasting him and whatnot because, like, that's just their dynamic and whatnot. And
Exactly, yeah. I
yeah, but
think the best part was that fucking panel where, the Thing had on just Johnny's hair as, like, a hairpiece, and then it just crumbled.
I love that. I love those two dynamic. But also, another reason why I like, going back to what you said earlier about Johnny being a dick is like, another reason why I would like to see, this like book from like Johnny's point of view is because I feel like Johnny gets like very like, I feel like in some cases people can just like, focus in on that Johnny being like this hot-headed dick jerk type character and whatnot, and not seeing like other sides of him, like his other like, very like, his other like very like soft sides and whatnot. I think like, I think it would have been interesting to see that, especially seeing how like, with Spider-Man is that same tried and true story we've
Mhm.
seen with Spider-Man like over and over again. Like never gets old, but at the same time it's still tried and true, where like, something happens and then by the something happens and like, by the end of it, he's the one who gets unlucky and whatnot. I think it would have been cool to just see like Johnny's perspective of that specifically.
Yeah. I feel like the book was very, like, Spider-Man focused. Now, I know this came out, like, a little bit before, Dan Slott took over. Ooh, I'm about to write my
Yeah,
favorite character,
yeah.
which okay, it's fine, I get it. I don't know, I feel like do you think the 5 issues was a little too short? Do you feel like it could have been, like, maybe they could have, like, squeezed an issue or 2 more in there?
I think like, I kind of feel like either way, like it's where it's like in that sweet spot where like I wouldn't mind more, but I think I'm fine with the 5 issues that we got.
Like, it doesn't need more, but you would have been okay if it did.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it did a really good job of wrapping up an entire story, between the 5 issues, and the story itself was very loose, which I was okay with. Ultimately, Soups, the story of this book was just telling the friendship between Spider-Man and, Human Torch, and it goes from them first meeting each other, and it talks about how they hate each other, and not even really hating, it's more of an envy, and then by issue 3 is when we really get them to figure out that they have some more things in common,
Yeah.
and then by the last issue, they come to an understanding. I think the crux of their envy primarily happened within issue 2, where they swapped places. N
Yeah.
Not a body swap, they just decided to just be like, "Hey, you know what? You think you can take my job? Then I guess let's just swap for the day."
And that what makes it funnier, actually.
Yeah, that makes it
Not
10
about it.
times funnier.
Just like literally just it's literally Peter shows up to like, the Fantastic Car, and then he's like, and then like he just or like the ship, not the Fantastic Car, but like, he shows up to like to like the ship and saying, "Hey, yeah, we're just switching places, so let's go."
And what happens, like, is just a whole freaking ride. You then have Johnny just doing some organized well, not doing organized crime. No, he's having to stop organized crime because it's the late 70s. Spider-Man is fighting mobsters and all the other type of shit like he does around that time. So Johnny is gonna be taking down some drug lords, and the drugs were called Zoomers, which that was such a
Yeah,
weird name. That was
exactly.
such a weird name.
I was like, wait, what? Because like obviously this is like 18 years after this book came out, and I'm thinking of Zoomers, like, in terms of like Gen Z, like plus Boomer. That's how I'm thinking of
Yeah, I was getting those vibes. I then was also thinking about that one sound. Is this fucking play about us?
it.
Oh gosh, but no, it was interesting, and then you got to see the ways they do it. I think the funniest thing that came out of this is when Johnny like flew over there with the Human Torch powers, and he's like, "Oh shit, they know it's me." So then he's like, "Okay, I'm just going go by myself." He goes up there, gets his ass knocked out instantly,
Yeah,
and just I don't know. I liked it, especially the whole punchline is that Spider-Man basically fucked up his time with the Fantastic Four because of his
Yeah,
webs being everywhere and shit. And then Johnny, on the flip side, is doing an amazing job. It was great to see. It was a nice little like these felt like mini episodes from a TV show.
exactly. And I feel like that really, like you said, this is where the envy really comes in and kind of like ties back into like the final issue where like, these like, probably because like just thinking about who Peter is and who Johnny is. Peter, like, is like, of course, dealing with these, like, with the street level stuff. Like, his powers are very, like, street level oriented, super strength, climb up, like, super strength, but not like, the greatest strength in the world. He can climb up walls, like, like swing on webs. And versus Johnny, who can literally turn on fire and whatnot. And so I think really, like, really like it was always going to be like but seeing how like Johnny is the irresponsible one but Peter is a mature one, like Johnny's the irresponsible one with the more powerful powers, the more like powers that can just like quickly damage you like that, versus Peter being the mature one who can like very much like it's like it's powers like easier to control, easier to hold back. And I think like that makes it like all the more interesting to see like how Johnny properly handles this, and how Peter really handles his time with the Fantastic Four, which I thought was also hilarious. How like where like Peter thought he was doing something correct, and then turns out it wasn't, and that they had like 2 minutes to get out of here. But like while I was reading it the other day, it was very. I think I cracked like because I love it. I love that. I love seeing like Marvel. I love seeing just like how like how like crazy this world is that they can just casually say, oh yeah, Reed and the rest of the Fantastic Four, we're going to this dimension that opens like only once in like 10,000 years, and he just casually says that like that's no big deal. I thought that was like hilarious. I'm like, that's a crazy thing to do, but and Spider-Man's like, sure, I'll go.
Yeah, he was hella excited to go, and
Yeah,
like the fact that he fucked it up, and he with the webs, which I mean, he did save them,
yeah,
but he fucked up the entire thing.
yeah, exactly. And because
Hmm.
I personally like it where Peter, because this is like because like my personal opinion when it comes to Peter's intelligence,
Hmm.
I like it when Peter is like a realistic, like kind of like I don't like when he's like a Reed Richards or like a Tony Stark level intelligent person. Like I feel like you should be able to find like a Peter Parker in like your average AP class in high school. And I think like I think like this like issue definitely kind of like plays to that, where it's just like he's not like the most intelligent person in the world. Like he's still very intelligent, just like
Hmm.
but he still like can make those fuck ups, like like where he did. Like between this and also like his very first issue of like where he literally breaks into the Fantastic Four building to impress them, it just like shows that Peter is very much still kind of a dumbass a little bit.
Yeah, like he's very headstrong, and I think that's one of the things I like about Spider-Man. Spider-Man is somebody who thinks with his like he doesn't like he just jumps into situations instead of
Yeah,
actually thinking it through sometimes, which is ironic because he's a very smart guy.
exactly.
And I think what's one of the things I like about Spider-Man too is that like he has a whole attitude. Like he
Yeah,
has a really like big can-do attitude, which I wish the movies kind of showed a little bit more. But
yeah.
we're not
That's
talking
more
about the
another.
movies, talking about the comics.
Yeah, and I think really that's like that really is why his dynamic with the Human Torch feels so good, like feels so good because just like these two characters were like on like a very surface level. They seem like other than like the jokes, they seem like very different. But then when you look at them, you're all like, okay, yeah, they're both kind of hot headed. They're both kind
Hmm.
of like they're both kind of like head first. They both kind of make these really dumb decisions. Like yeah, one may be obviously more mature, more responsible than the other one, and like one may like but that may be just because like hell you could maybe say that Peter would be a lot like Johnny if it wasn't for like Uncle Ben's death and he still had those powers and whatnot. And like
Yeah,
yeah, and like even
he'd
with
be
Johnny,
arrogant.
exactly. And yeah, with like even with Johnny being like still like having like responsibilities as a member of the Fantastic Four, it's like not really comparable to like Peter, where it's just like he's kind of like on his own doing this thing, versus Johnny, who's like obviously he has a team. He has like Reed being like he has Reed and Sue being above him, telling him, "Hey, don't do all that crazy stuff and whatnot." And where like Johnny kind of gets that balance where like okay, he can still be responsible. He can still learn how to be mature without like going completely off the rails. Versus Peter, where he just had to like something really bad had happened to him for him to really understand that. So I think seeing that the gap between these two characters aren't isn't very big is really what makes their dynamic interesting and why it's my personal, well, probably my second favorite superhero dynamic Peter has, with my first being Daredevil.
Ooh. No, but I really like his interactions with Daredevil and like I would say I remember the first time Daredevil found out that he was Spider-Man was during the death of Jean DeWolf. Great. Honestly, one of my favorite issues within Spider-Man. But I gotta say, I like just his like relationship with the Human Torch a little bit more. But maybe
Yeah,
it's because I like his relationship with the Fantastic Four as a whole.
yeah, of course.
Because out of all the Fantastic Four's like extended family, if you will, I think the one who is like the closest to home would be Spider-Man.
Yeah, and I think really like kind of like Daredevil and Human Torch kind of represent like two different sides of Peter. It's like you
Mhm.
have Daredevil right here, Human Torch right here, and you just have Peter in the middle and whatnot.
Exactly.
Which I think I really like, but also like you said, like kind of like both has like in terms of like what Peter goes through, like Peter's personality and like who he is represents two different sides of Peter, but also like kind of how like the Fantastic Four, how like Peter Spider-Man has always been like a character, even though I feel it's mostly street level. He's always been a character simply just because he's the most popular character. He's always been
Mhm.
a character that just like goes back and forth between like street level and like kind of like this big large scale level simply just because he's the most popular, but like more so street level than anything. And when it comes time for that like larger scale, like this larger scale universe threat is like definitely like kind of like closely tied with the Fantastic Four and whatnot. So
Mhm.
I think that's pretty good, and I think like we can go back, we can come back to like his overall relationship with the Fantastic Four once we get to issue 5, which is some of my favorite moments of like between the two.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think they had like the best ending ever.
yeah, exactly.
Uh I would say the one thing before we talk a little bit more about issue 3 is there's a line that Johnny Storm says when he's like doing all the shit that Spider-Man's doing against the organized crime. Cause turns out Craven the Hunter is the one who's like peddling the drugs or whatever.
Yeah,
And when he gets to the abandoned zoo, he's like, I swear it seems like all Spidey's adventures come in under budget. This book has so many fucking moments where I'm just out loud laughing.
yeah,
And it's been a minute since a book has done that. Like, this isn't my first time reading this book, but I haven't read this book in like a couple of years.
yeah.
And it still got me to laugh. Like, I love this. And honestly, Dan Slott, I think this is like some of your best work, if I'm being quite honest with you.
Exactly, exactly.
So, our third issue, which I think this might be my personal favorite issue,
Yeah,
is about the Spidey Mobile, the Spider Mobile. I gotta say, I know JC touched on this at a little bit ago about the exposition where we heard him talk about Gwen Stacy, and I just liked how this exposition really told the reader, "Okay, guys, this is the next issue. Some years has passed, but for people who don't know, we'll do a decade, which era we're trying to like invoke and talk about. We'll set the stage." He's having this whole exposition talk about what's been going on. Turns out he's also like on top of the bridge where Gwen died, and he's talking about how he missed Gwen. I loved that shit. And in my notes, I put that this miniseries honestly will. I think it's one of the greatest retcons I've ever seen. Would this even technically be a retcon? I mean, I feel like it would be because they already were friends, but it's like contextualizing even more of their friendship by
yeah.
having new stories in there. So I would say it's kind of a retcon.
I feel it. I feel it. Yeah, I think definitely because like I feel like the Gwen death era has always been like kind of like my favorite, like kind of like the post Gwen death has always been like some like my favorite type of like Spider-Man stories to like really like read and really like think about because of the fact that like that's when like we see stuff like Child Within. That's when we see like Peter finally like being with Mary Jane. I feel like a lot of great moments come from after like Gwen dies, which is why this issue like probably stuck so like struck like stuck so much to me because like I think overall just seeing like how like Peter and Johnny in both like a very like Johnny being pretty empathetic to Peter, seeing like his like softer side, his more human side, and the less like the more like okay, I'm going to comfort you, and the less of like, oh, I'm just a total like cocky jerk and whatnot. Seeing just like both these two kind of like come together and really just like kind of like talk about this really was just a very like good thing to like really like see.
It was nice. I think another thing too is that this is where the art really shined for me. Because the previous one, the colors were a little bit more muted, but it still looked retro. But by this third issue is when it got more like poppy and like 70s looking. And they
Yeah,
even added like the dot coloring in there. And like Ty Templeton, I love his art so much. Like this is fantastic. And it's so interesting because like you were saying, JC, a little bit ago, he's able to replicate like the old school artists like Romita. I would even primarily Romita. I'd say this is a lot of like Romita stylings, but even like other people's stylings as well. I'd even say maybe John Byrne. I don't know. Because the next issue after this, it does invoke like John Byrne's Fantastic Four stuff, but it's like so good. It's like he's able to keep his own style while still echoing the old stuff. Whereas I've seen a lot of people who try to do older stuff and they just end up replicating the person or they just miss
yeah.
the mark.
I just
Ty
like
Templeton really hit it on the head.
yeah, I think like it's really like that perfect like balance that I really like about like this entire comic when it comes to, like their art.
hmm I also think Ty Templeton's artwork could lend itself so well to animation. I know I already talked about this, but like this made me want an animated series. I'm sorry, it really
Yeah,
did.
like it kind of reminds me a little bit of like Spider-Man freshman year, the new cartoon that's supposed to
Yeah.
be coming out. That's a whole nother topic. Like I don't know what's the status of that, but
Look, listen, we don't know what the hell is happening with that. We really don't. Is it coming out? Is it canceled? Well,
yeah,
apparently, there was some news about how they changed the animation studio to this Japanese studio, and a lot of
yeah,
people are theorizing that it's not going to be 2D anymore.
yeah. So we're gonna have to see. But from what they showed us, it's a lot. It's something I want to show like that. I want to show that looks like that. It kind of reminds
Yeah,
me of like this type of style.
like it's something that's very stylistic, but also like just I don't know, it just feels comic booky. Like I loved seeing this type of stuff. Now, I don't get me wrong, I love me some spectacular Spider-Man, but like if a show had this type of flair, I would like, you know what, take my money. Take my money.
Exactly, exactly.
Mhm.
And I think really like, kind of like going back on the issue, like, I'm just like scrolling through right now just to refresh my memory. But like, the scene where like, Peter Parker and where Spider-Man and Human Torch are driving is absolutely hilarious. I love the spider car. I love how like, as it so like climbs, like, goes up walls. And of course, like, the joke at the end where like, he decides to keep the spider car for like one more thing, and then like that's so he can like mess with Jameson, which is like perfect.
Exactly. It just ended really well, and I like that issue a lot. I think one of my favorite lines in the book, and let me grab it. It's right here. Let me grab it. My favorite lines is when they're driving around and basically Peter is driving the car. He doesn't know how to drive. And the
Yeah.
Human Torch is like taking him like on a driving lesson. And they get stopped by the police, and he's like, "Let me guess, you don't have your driver's license." And the Human Torch is no. Human Torch asks that question, and he's like, "Is there anything else I should know?" And then Peter is like, "I'm wanted for murder," and he's like, "Anything else?" I think I'm pregnant.
That's
Eh,
probably my favorite joke actually in the entire in this like issue. Maybe
yeah,
the entire comic actually. That
I,
and the car thing.
yeah, I couldn't even choose what my favorite joke was because the next one in issue 4, which is titled Cat Paws, that one takes place in the 80s. I love the art in that too. And that one even had like the best joke in there too. Long story short, Soups, this is a Black Cat issue, takes place in the 80s. The Black Cat is trying to steal something from the Wakandan embassy. Spider-Man wants no parts. She then gets the Human Torch to do it, to help her do it, and turns out well, actually, no, I'm not going to spoil that ending for you guys. It's a really interesting ending. But
Yeah, it's
long
important
story,
to oops, sorry.
it oh no, it's okay. Go
Okay.
ahead.
It's important to note that Peter Parker has this black suit now.
Yes, yes, he
Yes.
does.
It's like the cover is really cool where it just has like I read this on Marvel Unlimited. I'm not sure they have like the covers in your book, Damon,
I
but
think they do.
okay. Yeah, I
Let me
really
see.
like how like, everybody's in black and whites, like, Peter, Johnny, and of course Black Cat. If not,
Yeah, I see it. It's right here.
Yeah, exactly. Like I think that's a really cool, like, kind of having the Fantastic Four like black and white costume right here.
Yeah, like it's a picture of for the soups at home. It's a picture of a black cat. They're in front of a giant heart. She has Spider-Man and the Human Torch on the side of her, and they're all in love. Cute
Yeah,
little issue. Very cute issue. And I feel like the Fantastic Four's black and white suits are underrated. Like,
exactly, exactly. Like I like to see like more of like a mix of them. Maybe like dark blue, kind of like how like the Raimi suit is like very like dark blue,
yeah.
where it kind of looks black in some shots. I'd love to see that with like a Fantastic Four suit in live action.
I always thought it was like a dark, dark blue until
Yeah,
like I would say like maybe 10 years ago. No, 5, 10 years ago is when I realized, oh wait, no, it's actually black and white. And that's
yeah,
because of the 90s show. In the 90s show, they looked like a dark blue instead of just
yeah,
completely black. Yeah.
exactly. So
But
we definitely. Oops, sorry.
no, go ahead, go ahead.
Um, just about to mention that we see like more of the extended family, the Fantastic Four extended family at the beginning of this issue because She-Hulk comes by.
Yeah. Wasn't expecting She-Hulk to be there, but I like that she was even added there too. And basically Johnny was trying to like flirt with her and everything, but he kind of like dropped the ball.
Yeah, like I think like it's really like like in this issue we see like it feels like definitely more of like Johnny's kind of like perspective. We see a lot more Johnny, a lot more like of like Human Torch, as in like because we see like the we see like She Hulk like more of the extended family, and also was it this issue because one issue Luke Cage made like a little cameo.
Yeah, was it this issue or the previous issue?
I'm not too sure, but I do like that we saw in general, like, a lot of the Fantastic Four extended family because, like, Luke Cage, She Hulk, and of course, obviously, Spider Man being a part of that family.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And I think this issue took place during the time she was on the team too.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, actually, you know what? Yeah, I think Luke Cage was in the last issue. He was in the last issue because Spider-Man was talking about how Jonah Jameson hired Luke Cage to get rid of Spider-Man or whatever.
Exactly.
Something like that. I gotta say, the best joke in this book was in this issue. And long story short, Soups, Spider-Man is racing against time to stop the Black Cat from doing what she's doing with the Human Torch at the Wakandan embassy. In the midst of this happening, there is a gigantic royal ball that's happening at the Wakandan embassy. So Spider-Man's trying to infiltrate that. He's trying to blend in, find like suits or whatever. He gets into a security suit and he's like, I gotta find another outfit. He then gets into a Wakandan bodyguard outfit. For those who don't know at home, Peter Parker is a white guy. So he's like, okay, this will work. I'm gonna blend in. Next panel, you see him walking into the wrong room, and it's like all the guards. They instantly know he's not with them. Funniest moment ever.
Exactly. Exactly.
I think it's up there with the time when during Straczynski's run where Peter got like braids when he was in
Ah,
Wakanda.
love, love that one. Love that one. Love that one. I would love to see it in live action if it wasn't kind of problematic, but like.
Oh my god, just imagine Tom Holland just sitting there in Wakanda.
I don't know. Maybe he gets a pass because he's dating the biracial girl, but we'll see.
Maybe. Maybe. You know what? I'm very pro black, so I probably would be like, "Oh, damn you, Disney." But at the same time, I'm like, it's kind of funny.
But the unserious side of me is just like, you know what? I'm gonna let this slide because it's funny. But yeah, like on the topic of Black Panther, like another like member, like a lot of people consider the extended family like being Black Panther or whatnot. Of course, like I really like, because I've always liked seeing like how like Black Panther like debuted in the Fantastic Four comics, and seeing like him kind of like still hold that like relationship to them, even though his first appearance he beats all of their asses and
He
whatnot.
does. He kicks their ass. Like he mops the floor with every single one of them.
Yeah, like like this is like slightly like because obviously this is the top, but I really like kind of like the Black Panther like cape suit that he has in this issue.
I wish we could have seen the cape in the movies
Yeah,
because I wish in comics currently he had the cape back. I don't think he has the cape back this as of now, but the cape was fucking epic. I like the cape a lot.
exactly, exactly. So
Hmm.
so yeah, really like I think overall like this is like this issue in particular just really like very much like intertwines like a lot of different other like Marvel characters besides like just like Spider-Man and Fantastic Four characters with like that being Black Panther and She-Hulk in it. So like because I've always liked how like how just really like something I've always like what attracts me to like really superhero universes and comics is the fact that like a character can just like casually show up for a couple minutes and then just like kind of like just leave and it's just like really no big deal. And I think that's the thing I really like that like oh yeah, of course they're going to like a little like something like some event at the Wakanda embassy like Spider-Man the Human Torch and Black Cat because those things can happen.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I like the issue a lot, but I, it was fun. I would say it wasn't my favorite issue. I felt like it was just a lot of fluff, but I
Yeah.
liked it a lot though. Still, it was still an entertaining ride. The
Yeah.
crown jewel, I would say, would be the last issue called Together Again, which takes place in present day, and by present I mean 2005. And by present, I mean prior to Marvel deciding that Spider-Man couldn't be with Mary Jane.
Yeah, her name's Mary Jane Watson Parker in this next issue for a reason.
Yes, hyphen Parker.
Yeah.
And also they allowed Peter to grow up a little bit. But you know what? I'm not throwing shade at Marvel.
Yeah.
I'm not.
Maybe
I'm not.
2005 should just be that. Maybe we should just eternally live in 2005. That was a good year.
Honestly, in my head canon, Spider-Man kind of ended in 2005. Like in my status quo, in my head canon, Peter and Mary Jane, they're still married. He's still a high school teacher.
Yeah.
And then maybe he like teaches some college classes on the weekend. Boom.
We'll get to like definitely the teaching and how I really like that next issue.
Together Again, that's the issue that we're going on to right now. This is the last issue, the big magnum opus, and it opens up with them meeting at their usual place, which is the Statue of Liberty. And they're just talking, and they then have like a little flashback of what happened earlier in the night. And I gotta say, this issue also has another famous panel
Yeah.
or page of information. Basically, Peter is having an assembly at his high school that's happening that night, which I don't understand why it was happening at night though. If it's a assembly, that's weird.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, maybe it's like
Mm,
some sort of like meeting or something like that. I don't know. 'Cause I had some of that where
mhm.
like, there would be have like there would be like some like, parents meeting like, after school. So back when I was in elementary. So who knows? But
Yeah, maybe, or it could have been like a game was happening. But then again, like Johnny Storm was there, he's famous. But then again, the kids don't really care. So I don't know. I don't know. But for some reason, big event, a huge portion of Peter's students are there, along with other students from the school. They're all there. Johnny Storm is revealed to be the special speaker there. The students don't give a damn that Johnny Storm is there. They don't really care. There's just one girl who's reading a Vogue issue. And if you look closely, you can see who's on the cover of Vogue. It's Mary Jane.
yeah.
And her and the others, and so the girl and the other students are talking about how, like, why don't we get people who are actually interesting in to do these type of like assemblies or conversations or talks or whatever? And they're talking about Julia Roberts or Gwen Stefani, 2005. But you know what? That they're still relevant
Yeah.
today.
Sarah Jessica Parker as well.
Oh, Sarah Jessica Parker?
Yeah, they mentioned because like they said like when it's revealed that Mary Jane is Peter's wife, they're like oh Mary Jane Watson Parker OMG. What about Sarah Jessica Parker too? That was a funny joke. So like
Well, okay, that was actually, yeah, that was kind of funny. Even, yeah, okay, okay. I could buy that. I could buy that.
yeah
Basically, fucking, they're saying all this different type of stuff, and then the panel you see like a woman in some high heels walking, and the sound says click, 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 click down the hallway. And Mary Jane walks in, walks past the students. All the students are shook because they're like, "Isn't she the famous supermodel?" Da, 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 da. Oh yeah, that's Mary Jane Watson Parker. Apparently, she's dating someone within our school. And then everyone puts two and two together that the Parker that she's dating, well, no, married to, is Peter Parker. And Johnny Storm has a whole fit and is like, "Are you serious? You are the Parker that she's married to?"
yeah
And Mary Jane was there to drop off lunch. That was all she was there for.
exactly. I think that's like just incredible and whatnot. But of course that doesn't like that. It doesn't end there because then there's a hostage situation, and
Yeah.
the way, because okay, so there's like a scene. So there's like, also like they're in the middle of school. Peter's in like the middle of like, a bunch of people. He can't really go Spider-Man mode quite without revealing his identity. So he has to find a way so he has to just straight up reveal that he's Spider-Man to the Human Torch. And it's so funny. Like, he just like makes a bunch of like spider motions with his hand and then points to himself. And then Johnny's like, you gotta be kidding me. You're Spider-Man?
That was the funniest thing ever. Like Ty Templeton does a really good job of like drawing those emotions, and then even the panel layouts were just helping a lot too. Like it's the fact that Peter was doing that, and then like Johnny's like, "Okay, what the fuck are you doing?" Like his face is like, "Okay," and like I know you know Spider Man. Okay, okay, and then when he finally puts it together, his whole face goes like dead, and he's like, "No."
You gotta be kidding me. No, like,
I think moments like that is what really makes this not movie, this whole this book a whole like gem. And like when it ultimately ends and they're talking and having their little heart to heart about how Johnny didn't know and he tells him why, and then they basically just like admit that they envied each other for a long time. I think this has the most wholesome ending that I've read in
yeah.
comics. I'd say top 5 maybe, because in the end Johnny invites Peter and his family over for dinner.
Yeah, exactly. And like, seeing Reed, I believe it's Reed who tells like, Peter, like, I think like, Franklin asks, hey, like, who's that? And he said, Peter Parker. That's like, they're like,
Oh, that
he's
was the other
family.
thing. That was the
Yeah.
thing. Yeah.
Yeah. He's family and whatnot. And I love the moment where like, Peter says, yeah, Uncle Ben's, they usually know best. Like, that was very like,
That was
heartwarming.
so sweet.
Yeah.
That was so sweet. Like reading that and then seeing the last page, which was a photo album of all the different times where they got together and hung out. It was really just heartwarming. And it also kind of made me sad because I was like sitting there thinking, like, oh, Spider-Man. I wish we had this again, but hey.
Yeah. We we
But
have
that's a whole other conversation for another day. We'll talk about
exactly.
JC. So my question for you, since we just got done talking about a huge chunk of this book, how would you rate this book? And do you think it will stand the test of time?
I think I would probably rate it like a good like 8, 9 out of 10. I think definitely like it's a very good like because a lot of people like we mentioned earlier when we talk about like how a lot of people think comics are hard to get into. Unfortunately, a reason why people think comics are hard to get into is because of like the older like dialogue and like the older arts. Like for example, when I started reading some like older issues of Fantastic Four, just like some of the dialogue is just like like it's just like I don't hold it against it because like it was the '60s, but I'm just still like, but I still it's still hard to read, and I
Hmm.
think really like any like book that really kind of like very much encapsulate like do a good job like encapsulating like honoring what came before while also kind of like modernizing it for like new audiences is always a very good book to read. I think this like right here is a good job. Like going back to what I said earlier about the art. The art is phenomenal. It's the art's phenomenal. The art's like is very like reminiscent of like like the eras that it represents and whatnot. And I think like it's definitely like something that I would recommend when it comes to like people like when thinking about like Peter's main dynamic with other superheroes. Because I feel like with like I don't want to go into a whole like tangent like into like different like issues I had with Peter like with like maybe like Peter and other superheroes and whatnot, like Iron Man in the MCU, or how a lot of people like likes the Spidey pull dynamic. I like to say that like because I'm personally not a big fan of like the Spidey pull dynamic. I like to say that like Spider-Man and Human Torch is what people think Spider-Man and Deadpool is.
I agree.
Yeah, I think like
Mm.
people should like go and really like if they want to figure out like Spider-Man, like how does Spider-Man work with other heroes. I think this is a very great example because like the two just have a lot of interesting like potential that's very much explored upon with like them both being teenagers, them both being like hotheads, them both like kind of having very cocky moments, one more than the other obviously, but like and it's very good, especially seeing how like like when people think of like these characters and just seeing them on like a surface level type of way. I think this is a very good book to really like understand like how similar they are and how different they are. So I think this book is definitely going to stand the test of time. And I love to see like more like like Spider-Man and Human Torch. That's always going to be like something in my heart and whatnot. I'm looking at the comic right now. I just love like the photo that we have at the picture book we have where like you have Peter going on a mission with the Fantastic Four because he said like because Peter said like literally like in this issue when he reveals his identity saying that I've been jealous of you because you get to go through on all these like cool adventures like meanwhile I'm kind of stuck here.
Exactly. Like it's interesting because at the end they kind of just like incorporate each other into each other's lives, and it causes them to have a greater bond and a better understanding and everything. Uh, that was just the most heartwarming thing, especially seeing their like their friendship grow to where it is, and it's making me think about the time when they were like roommates. I love their friendship so much,
Yeah,
especially when Dan Slott like wrote in his run when nobody knew who Spider-Man was again, and then Peter decided to reveal his identity, Fantastic Four, for the first time, for the second time almost, and they all were like, "Oh my god, Peter, we missed you." I loved that panel too.
yeah,
Um, but personally, I would say this book stands the test of time. I would give it I'm going to say 10 out of 10. This is something that I can find myself rereading. This is something I can find myself laughing at it again all over again. And I feel like this would be a book that I'd recommend somebody who wants to get into comics.
exactly.
If someone wants to know a little bit more about Spider-Man, if someone wants to see him interact with other heroes, because I notice sometimes whenever I talk about the character and tell them that he does not like people like that, they're kind of taken aback. He's a
Yeah,
loner, but when there's people that really like the Fantastic Four and him are like this, like they're tight,
exactly. Like
and
you even see that when like I think he says this to Mary Jane when they came over for dinner, saying that like it was either Mary Jane or Aunt May because like they were both in the scene where
mhm.
like he says like oh like this is like Avengers that's like work, this is friend, like these people are my friends.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. Because I'm thinking about because this is around the era when Spider-Man moved Mary Jane and Aunt May into the Avengers Mansion. No,
Yeah.
Avengers Tower. And I remember there's an issue where Wolverine says something a little like messed up directed towards Mary Jane. And he threw Wolverine off the top of the damn building through the damn glass and everything because of that shit.
Yeah,
Like the Avengers always felt like coworkers, but when he's around them, that's family. Like
exactly.
exactly. And I just love that interaction and everything. So I would say this definitely does stand the test of time. But the real question that I have for you guys, Soups, is do you think so? Please be sure to let us know here at Super Saturdays. Be sure to let us know through our Instagram, Super Saturdays Podcast, our TikTok at Super Saturdays Pod, and Twitter at Super Saturdays PC. Your messages and reviews can make their way on the show. This was Super Saturdays. I'm Damon.
I'm JC.
And where can they find you, JC, if you want to give any socials?
All right. You can find me at the JC Elliott, ELLIOTT, two L's, two T's, on Instagram and on Twitter.
All right. See you next Saturday, Soups.